Everything happened so fast I didn't even fully understand what I was feeling, or what I had done. The more I thought about that moment, that minute, the guilt inside me kept growing. Maybe talking about it will ease the burden, or maybe it'll make everything even messier. But this secret feels way too heavy to keep inside. The truth is, I'm ashamed to even talk about it, but it feels like the only way to finally let go of what's been haunting me. That evening, my mom was at the office again. Everyone knew how much she loved her job. Being Kathy Marshall meant being hardworking, responsible, and always in control. My mom worked as a procurement manager at a big company, and she often stayed late at the office. Some nights, she didn't even come home. Her passion for work had always left me feeling a little lonely, but for her, this was just normal. That evening, it was just Hector and me at home, my mom's new husband, the perfect guy, 45, muscular, well-groomed, and a human resources manager. To others, Hector might seem handsome, kind, and charismatic, but that night he was so much more in my eyes. As for me, I'm Grace. I'm 23 and in my last year of architecture school. My life has always been neat and under control. Thanks to my love for sports, I've always stayed in shape. I'm the captain of the university volleyball team, which gives me a bit of a special status both among my friends and in how I see myself. I like to take care of myself, my hair, my skin, my clothes, they've always had to be on point. I thought of myself as strong, disciplined, and organized until that night. Things weren't supposed to happen like this. That night started off like any ordinary evening, but it didn't take long to realize there was nothing ordinary about it. If you enjoy listening to stories like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel and watch this video until the end. Trust me, this is a story you don't want to miss. That evening, I had prepared a nice dinner for my mom and Hector. My mom had come home early from work, but I can honestly say she didn't lift her head from her laptop the entire time. Even when we all sat down for dinner, she kept checking the notifications on her phone. That's just my mom, dedicated to her job and known for her discipline. But I couldn't ignore the distance between her and Hector. Things had started to shift a year after they got married. Hector is calm, mature, and romantic, I know that about him. In fact, when he and my mom first started dating, we used to talk a lot about those qualities of his. But now, it's impossible not to notice the sadness in his eyes. At dinner, everyone complimented the food. Even my mom, in between hurried bites, managed to say sweetly, "This is amazing, Grace." "Thank you." But before dinner was even over, she grabbed her bag and said, "I've got some things to finish at the office. I might be back late," and left. When Hector shut the door behind her and came back to the table, there was a tired look on his face. Quietly, I started clearing the plates while he poured himself a glass of water and stared out the window. Something felt off. Hector usually carried such positive energy, but tonight was different. After I finished the dishes, I went into the living room. Hector was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the dark TV screen. I sat down next to him and softly asked, "You okay?" He seemed startled for a moment, then turned his head to me and gave a faint smile. "I'm fine, Grace, just a little tired, I guess." But from his eyes, I could tell he was saying the opposite of his words. The silence dragged on. Feeling a nudge inside me, I said, "You know, Hector, I'm not used to seeing you like this." He paused for a moment, then took a deep breath and said, "Some days are harder than others. Kathy's job, her passion, I get it, I really do. But sometimes, I don't know, I just feel a little lonely." His voice cracked just slightly. I never expected him to admit something like that. Hector was always the calm, collected, and strong type, but in that moment, he was so human. All I could manage to say was, "You're right." The weight of the moment shifted the atmosphere in the living room. The silence felt like it was both separating us and somehow pulling us closer at the same time. I wanted to help him, to make him feel better, but how? After Mom left for the office, Hector had put on a movie in the living room. He was stretched out on the corner of the couch, lazily flipping through channels with the remote. His eyes were on the screen, but it was clear his mind was somewhere else. Without saying anything, I headed to the kitchen. I decided to make some coffee, not because I really wanted a drink, but because I didn't want him to feel alone. A few minutes later, I came back into the living room with 2 mugs of coffee. "I made one for you too," I said with a smile. He looked up, a little surprised, then smiled softly as he took the mug. "Thanks, Grace, that's really thoughtful of you." I sat down on the opposite end of the couch. There were a few cushions between us, but even being that close to him felt different. On the TV, a romantic movie was playing. I'd always known Hector was a romantic guy, but it caught me off guard that he was watching something so cliché. I smiled slightly and said, "Didn't peg you as someone who watched these kinds of movies." He shrugged. "Sometimes they're good for taking your mind off things," he said, setting his mug on the table. "Besides, a little emotional moment here, and there isn't so bad, right?" As we got into the movie, the conversation started to flow. We'd comment on certain scenes, laugh occasionally, or debate the characters' choices. Hector's calm, deep voice and the way he gave me his full attention stirred something strange inside me. The scenes in the movie somehow made the quiet moments between us feel even heavier. At one point, I felt his gaze on me. At first, he didn't say anything, but I noticed him trying to look away. I realized I'd unconsciously crossed my legs, causing my short black shorts to ride up a bit. My tank top, thanks to the way I was sitting, clung tighter than usual. As I tried to adjust myself subtly, I couldn't help but wonder if his quick glances meant something or if I was just imagining it. In that moment, even though he didn't say a word, the faint look in his eyes both excited and unsettled me. Combined with the romantic scenes playing on the screen, the air in the room grew thick. I tried to seem calm on the outside, but inside I was a mess. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "I think I'm getting a bit tired. I'll head upstairs and get some rest," I said abruptly, standing up. Hector tilted his head slightly and said, "Of course, Grace. Good night." But there was something hidden in his voice. As soon as I got to my room, I shut the door and took a deep breath. My heart was pounding in my chest. What I had just felt and that subtle tension I noticed scared me. I couldn't fully define it, but I knew I needed to run from those feelings. I lay down on my bed, closed my eyes, but his gaze just wouldn't leave my mind. Even after retreating to my room, Hector's presence lingered in my thoughts. The scenes from that movie and the strange tension between us kept playing over and over in my head. The more I thought about how perfect of a man he was, the guilt inside me grew. When he married my mom, everyone knew he was romantic and loyal. He was the kind of man who brought stability, discipline, and a sense of safety into someone's life. For a woman as hardworking and busy as my mom, Hector was like hitting the jackpot. But at the same time, I couldn't help noticing how physically attractive he was. Hector's broad shoulders, his charismatic gaze, and that calm smile that appeared when he talked made it hard not to feel something, even for someone like me. Those glances I noticed during the movie felt like something shifted. I was almost certain he noticed me too. The more these thoughts invaded my mind, the more I felt both guilty and strangely excited. I was mad at myself. I shouldn't feel this way. It wasn't right. But the quickened beat of my heart, and the fluttering sensations rising within me silenced any logical thoughts. For a long time, I hadn't realized how much of an impact Hector's presence had on me. Now it was all too clear. That night, I eventually fell asleep amidst these confusing thoughts. Even in my dreams, Hector's face was there. When I woke up the next morning, the shame I felt was overwhelming, but getting rid of these thoughts seemed impossible. As days went by, things between Hector and me began to change. On nights when my mom was at work, we often ended up alone together. Our interactions became more familiar, even if unintentionally at first. I was a little shy and uneasy, but Hector's calm and friendly demeanor put me at ease. Every time I looked at him, I felt a spark inside me. With every passing day, I found myself more drawn to him, and at the same time, I hated myself for feeling this way. I was almost certain Hector noticed the shift too. Those moments when our eyes met, the subtle electricity I felt sent storms through me every time. Knowing he noticed me too made me happy in a way, but it also terrified me. And then that night finally came. My mom was at the office again for another late meeting. The house was quiet, just like that first night, but this time there was something else in the air, tension and anticipation. My heart was racing, unsure of what was coming that night. I couldn't sleep, my thoughts kept bouncing back and forth between Hector and the strange feelings I had for him. My heart was beating wildly, and the chaotic emotions in my mind felt like they were pinning me to my bed. Realizing I wouldn't fall asleep, I decided to get up. I was wearing my favorite red lace satin nightgown. The thin, soft fabric felt like a gentle caress against my skin. It was past 2 a.m. I quietly made my way to the kitchen, thinking maybe a glass of water would help. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, my breath caught in my throat. Hector was there. He was the kind of guy who was usually asleep before midnight, but tonight was clearly different. There was an empty bottle of wine on the table, and he was pulling a second one out of the fridge. He wasn't wearing a shirt, his broad, muscular back was bare, and with every movement, the muscles in his shoulders flexed. The lines of his back looked like a sculpture under the dim kitchen light. I couldn't take my eyes off him. When Hector closed the fridge and turned around, he noticed me. "Grace, couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice tired but calm. I tried to pull myself together. "Yeah, something like that." "Why are you still up?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. He gave a small smile and held up the wine bottle. "Sometimes you just need to clear your head. Drinking alone gets boring though. Care to join me?" I hesitated, but I couldn't say no. "Sure," I said, and as he poured another glass, I slid into the chair beside him. At first we talked about random things, small talk, but as we emptied our glasses, the conversation got deeper. We talked about my mom, Hector's job, life in general. I was reminded once again of how mature and calm he was. His openness put me at ease, and before I knew it, laughter was filling the quiet kitchen. "These chairs are kind of uncomfortable, aren't they?" Hector said after a while, his gaze sending a small shiver down my spine. "Want to move to the living room? It's more comfortable there." The thought of being alone with him in another room sent a ripple of unease through me, but I nodded. We got up and moved to the living room. Hector settled on the couch, and I sat down next to him. The space between us was shrinking, physically and emotionally. The wine had left us both a little tipsy. My eyes kept drifting to Hector's strong hands, and the faint scruff on his face. And the way he carried himself with such confidence, he was looking at me too long and meaningfully. "Grace," he said, his voice low. At that moment, my heart was racing so fast, everything around me felt like a blur. Looking into his eyes, I whispered a few shaky words. "You're really handsome," I said, my voice trembling and perfect in every way. The pull I felt toward him grew even stronger. My eyes locked with his, and slowly I rested my head on his shoulder for a moment, maybe longer. It was just us, nothing else existed, just us and that moment. Hector gently rested his head against mine, and we sat there in complete silence for a while. Then our eyes met again, and we were so close neither of us could look away. And then everything burst open. I couldn't stop myself, my lips brushed against his, fearless and soft. Then again, deeper this time, a kiss full of passion. We took a step further together without needing a single word. When Hector's hand rested on my waist, a warmth spread through my entire body, shaking me to my core. Within seconds, I found myself in his arms as he pulled me closer. My breath caught in my throat. There was excitement but also hesitation. Yet in that moment, it was just us. As Hector's hand slid down from my waist, I felt every motion ripple through me. Tilting my head slightly, I leaned in too close to resist him anymore. In the heat of the moment, I kissed his neck, the soft touch of my lips sending waves of sensation through me. That moment was beyond everything, nothing else mattered. We were just living in it. My body melted into the heat of Hector's hands. Each move he made seemed more deliberate than the last. My hands wandered over his shoulders and neck, trembling as the intensity of the moment consumed me. Being this close to him, feeling the desire in every touch, left me completely intoxicated. Hector's gaze bore into mine, deep and intense. In that instant, the rest of the world faded away, nothing mattered except being with him. When my hands finally gave in and wrapped around his neck, I felt him even closer to me, filling every inch of the space between us. When Hector's arms tightened around my waist, pulling me firmly into him, I forgot everything else. All my doubts, my fears, they vanished. I was filled with nothing but the overwhelming need to be with him. My lips found his again, and as our kisses deepened, my body refused to pull away. Every touch, every move felt like my entire soul belonged to him. As Hector's hands moved with more certainty and intention, I matched his pace, drawn to him with equal intensity. Our passionate kisses erased all distance between us. In my mind, there was only one thought: to feel this, to be his. I opened my eyes after what felt like hours of silence, tossing and turning restlessly in bed. It was nearly 4 a.m. I saw Hector move quietly, slipping out of bed and gathering his clothes from the floor. My vision was still blurry, but I was frozen in the lingering impact of the moment. As I watched Hector head to his room, my gaze caught on my red nightgown. It was still on the floor, like a reminder of everything that had just happened. My body felt drained, and the wine was still in my system, pulling my eyelids shut. My thoughts swirled with the feelings and chaos of the night, and eventually, I drifted into unconsciousness. Until morning, when I woke up to the first light of day. It took everything to open my eyes. My head pounded, and I was still hazy from the wine. I tried to piece together the night, but then everything with Hector came flooding back: his hands, his lips, the moments we shared, how beautiful it was, how strange it felt. But now, in the daylight, all I felt was shame. The nightgown was still on the floor, the red satin and lace shimmered as if mocking me with memories of the night. I picked it up quickly and shoved it into the closet. I moved fast, but the chaos inside me only grew. What had I done? I needed to get to the bathroom. I needed to cool off, to escape those moments, even just for a second. I grabbed some fresh underwear and headed for the bathroom. Every step I took brought flashes of the night, Hector's warmth, the feel of his lips on mine. But now, all I felt was guilt drowning me. That night had been beautiful, but it was also a disaster. What had I done? What was happening to me? The hot water from the shower eased some of the tension in my body, but I couldn't shake the heaviness inside me. When I stepped out, I stared at myself in the mirror, the exhaustion in my eyes, the guilt that wouldn't fade. I could feel it all. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and headed toward the sounds coming from the kitchen. Mom and Hector were having breakfast. They smiled at me, but their smiles didn't bring me any comfort. Instead, they added to the weight pressing down on me. It was like carrying a burden I didn't fully understand. Flashes of last night, those kisses, his hands, those moments, Hector being so close, the intensity in his eyes. "I'm not hungry this morning," I muttered, my voice hoarse and shaky. All the emotions I didn't want to name were bubbling inside me: guilt, confusion. Nothing felt the same anymore. I could sense the awkward silence in the room hanging heavy like a cloud. I just needed to get away. Somehow, later, as I passed through the kitchen on my way back to my room, I glanced into the living room, and memories hit me like a wave. That night with Hector, kissing, heading to my room together. My chest tightened as I thought about it. It was strange, but in a way, it was magical too. I felt torn, drawn to him yet terrified. The turmoil inside me just kept growing and growing. I knew I couldn't take it anymore. Staying here with these feelings was impossible. I thought long and hard, trying to figure out what. Finally, I found my answer. I couldn't stay, I needed to leave. So I packed a few of my things and decided to slip out early in the morning before anyone noticed. I didn't know how to explain it to anyone, but I didn't need to. This house, this life, it wasn't for me anymore. I needed to save myself, and leaving was the only way. If you've made it this far, I know my story has hit you hard. There's so much more to share, and you won't want to miss a thing. Hit that follow button, turn on your notifications, and don't forget to leave a comment about this story. I can't wait to hear your thoughts, so let's talk in the comments. Your support means the world to me.